All right. So ladies and gentlemen, good morning and good afternoon here from New York. My name is Victoria Baker. I work at the Consul General of Denmark here in New York. I'm part of the organizing team behind this new 3-part webinar series, The Gender Effect at Work, where we invite influential speakers from the Nordics and United States to discuss this important agenda. During this first webinar today, Reversing the She Session, Ensuring Gender Equal Economic Growth Post-COVID-19, our moderator and expert panel, they will share insights and point of view on historical learnings, how historical learnings hold an impact on the recovery of the pandemic, and how gender equality can be ensured to support economic growth from a policy agenda point of view. So I would first of all say that this Nordic webinar series is co-hosted and organized by the Consulates General of Denmark and Sweden in New York in partnership with New York City Economic Development Corporation and in cooperation with Consulates General of Finland, Iceland, and Norway in New York. Most importantly, we are grateful for the support we have received by the Nordic Council of Ministers to power this webinar series. Now, some practicalities before we start. First, this webinar will be recorded for promotional use. Second, your lines has been muted and video turned off. It's only the moderator and panelists who will have their cameras on. And finally, in the end, we have an open discussion that we hope that you will join, where you can submit your questions for our panelists in the Q&A function. You'll see an icon on the Zoom here. Today's agenda, a couple of practical notes I've just given. Then we'll go to our moderator, who will give a couple of data points behind. Then we'll have an introduction to our panel, and we'll start with the roundtable discussion. We'll end with the open Q&A, and finally we'll give a little hint into the next webinars. Again, a big thank you to our partners that you'll see here, the Nordic Consulates, the Nordic Council of Ministers, and New York City Economic Development Corporation. Today we have 4 countries represented, and we'll get more into that. The first one is Sweden, United States, Denmark, and Iceland. So we'll see their point of views. We are lucky to have and very fortunate to have our moderator, who is Richard Robb. Richard is professor at Columbia University, School of International and Public Affairs, where he teaches classes on economics and finance. Further, Richard is the CEO at Christopherson, Robb & Co. And in 2019, Yale University Press, they published his book, Willful: How We Choose What We Do. So I'd like to hand over, that was my short introduction here, to you, Richard, because I know you have some interesting points to share today. And remember to unmute. There we go. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Victoria, for including me. It's very nice to be with you today. As you said, I'd like to set the stage with some data and a little analysis from the perspective of economics. It is true that he sessions are a thing, and this line shows the ratio of female to male employment in the United States going back to the 1940s. You can see in these little red circles how it spurts up during the recessions. The recessions are coded by these gray bars. And then again, particularly in the 81, 82 recession, you see a big increase in the female to male employment. It doesn't really reverse itself. And then again, in the Great Recession, following in 2007 to 2009, and then a little bit of a recovery afterwards, but not complete, where males started to reclaim their share of the labor market. And during the Great Recession, male employment dropped by 7.1%, while female employment dropped by a relatively mild 3.4%. So why is that? Well, if we can go to the next slide. We can basically explain most of the response by looking by employment by gender by looking at occupations. Okay. Men tend to be more employed in cyclical industries that suffer during the business cycle. In the United States, men account for 75% of employment in the manufacturing of durable goods, which are the most cyclical, and 89% of employment in construction. So, Victoria, if we could go to the next slide, please. If you look in the upper right-hand corner, this is a piece of scholarly research that shows if we were to predict by looking at the housing crash that hit the United States in 2008 and 2009, just by looking at occupations, what would we expect to see the change in composition of gender employment? You would predict men to lose 7.4% and women to lose 3%, which is pretty much what happened. So so we can see from the study that's a big part of the story. But when these recessions end, there's a partial recovery, but not all the way. More on that in a moment. This pandemic was very different. Okay, and Victoria, if we could go to the next slide, please. Okay, the red line in these graphs show the percentage change in female employment from the peak in February 2020. And the blue line is for males. So I'll look down in the bottom right-hand corner. Because I'm among diplomats, I put all the countries in alphabetical order here. But in the United States, a very big she-cession at the beginning, completely out of sync with any previous recession. You see female employment dropping by 18% and male only by 14%. Now, the occupational composition has to have something to do with it, because this time construction and manufacturing were not particularly hard hit. In fact, there was a big shift in consumer demand towards durable goods, which tend to relatively employ men. And the high contact sectors, which are where women are more likely to be employed, were less affected. And then over time in the United States, up in this data comes through the March of this year, we see a relative recovery of women, so that the total decline in employment for both men and women during the pandemic is about 5%, but still much more relatively affecting women than any previous recession. We look in the Nordic countries. Denmark is not that different from the United States in the end. Men have lost a bit more than women, but about the same. In Finland, though, there we see a real she-cession in Finland. It's the most pronounced, where women have lost jobs relative to men. In Iceland, in April, there was a sharp decline in female employment, which was reversed in the following 2 months. And now it's about the same. And we shouldn't make much of Norway. There's been very little job change in Norway. If you look at the scale on the left-hand side, it's just Norway's been relatively unaffected. And in Sweden, male and female employment have moved in lockstep, but men have recovered more recently and women have not. Okay, so it's interesting to look at the data to set the stage for some of our later discussion. Okay, so why should we even care? It reverses itself, and women lost jobs, and then the recession ends. The reason I think this is very important, it matters from a policy perspective, is history teaches us that some jobs that are lost in a cyclical downturn never come back. Economists call this phenomenon hysteresis. So a short-term shock can have long-term effects. For some workers who drop out, their skills atrophy, their career is disrupted, they lose attachment to the labor force. And that's why, from an economist perspective, this experience requires serious attention and almost certainly some policy response. So that's what I have to say about economics and the data. So, we're very fortunate here to have a distinguished group of panelists. First, I'd like to ask the question to Karin Straundus. She's State Secretary to Marta Stenaby, Minister for Gender and Equality in Housing, with responsibility for urban development, anti-segregation, and anti-discrimination. She has extensive experience from Swedish politics, such as State Secretary to the Minister for Culture and Democracy and head of the Green Party Parliamentary Office. So, Karin, what tools do governments have to improve economic equality? Are there any specific examples from Sweden that could be interesting for us to highlight?
Well, thank you so much, Richard, and thank you for the interesting presentation that you just made. I really look forward to the discussion today because I think it will give us a lot of knowledge and impressions from our respective countries. To answer your question, of course, economic equality between women and men is a crucial aspect of gender equality. We know that money matters. It impacts so many aspects of life. Standard of living, obviously, health, education, and also a woman's possibility to leave a violent relationship. And without securing women's and girls' access to economic resources and leadership, there can be no gender equality. The Swedish government is a feminist government, and as a feminist government, we include a gender equality perspective into all areas of policy making on a broad front, nationally and internationally. And I want to say that we have a long way before we reach gender equality in Sweden, but we have come some way along the road. And this derives from decades of political will to prioritize gender equality, to take necessary political decisions and to build an infrastructure for gender equality. And I want to mention a few reforms that have been crucial. Free education and health services. They are the core of the Swedish welfare state. School and university is accessible to all as it is publicly financed. And the same goes for healthcare. So the size of your wallet should not decide whether you are able to, get an education or whether you're able to get treatment when you're sick. And that's a really important equality reforms. Another one is affordable and high quality childcare that makes it possible for both parents to work, and also individual taxations that creates an incentive for both the woman and a husband or both partners in a marriage to work and earn an independent income. Also, I think another structural, really important reform is parental insurance that makes it possible also for both mothers and fathers to share the parental leave and also to stay at home with the newborn for about a year and a half. And also the fourth point I want to make is the universal access to sexual and reproductive health and rights so that we ensure women's rights to decide over their own bodies and their own lives. So these aspects have all had an important impact on women's labor market participation, on their earnings, well-being, and also bargaining power at home. There is no excuse for gender inequality, and let us never forget that gender equality is a fundamental matter of human rights, democracy, and social justice. Everyone must be able to fully enjoy their human rights. So that's what I wanted to say for an introduction. Thank you very much. Looking forward to the discussion.
Richard, you are muted.
That's why they call us absent-minded professors. Thank you. Next is Faye Penn. She's Executive Director of Women.NYC, New York City government initiative designed to help women succeed in their careers and businesses through innovative programs and partnerships. She currently leads the New York City Economic Development Corporation's initiatives team, which translates policy goals relating to industry development into actionable programs. Now, Karen said that Sweden still has ways to go to achieve gender equality. It sounds like a paradise compared to the United States. What's needed here for government on a policy level to change the role for women in the private sector?
Well, thank you so much for that question, Professor Robb. And I also want to say, Karen, that was an amazing introduction. Co-sign everything you said. You know, I don't think that what's needed to achieve gender equality differs that much from place to place. It's the particular circumstances that that governments and the private sector share that contributes to, I think, different levels of success. I also really appreciate the windup and the statistics around the what folks call the she session. I have to admit, I'm a little mixed about the term she session because I feel like it's kind of a cute word for something that is pretty terrible for a lot of women, especially right now, but I know it's descriptive. So here we are. So, you know, the number one thing that the United States needs to tackle, I feel like, to reverse the she session, there we go, is childcare. Like, this is something that has been a problem for a long time in the United States, that it's viewed as a private family matter and not as an economic development issue. It's viewed as something that folks have to sort out on their own for the most part, but other countries, the Nordic countries, have been far ahead of us in recognizing that childcare, affordable childcare, is infrastructure, that this is something that helps women participate in the economy fully, men too, of course. We don't have guaranteed paid family leave in America. We only recently got guaranteed leave, and there's a lot of talk about how more men should take family leave. But if some companies pay moms and not dads, it's, we still don't have fully gender blind leave policies, in the private sector. And I think that that contributes to, from the very beginning, right? We have differing practices around who takes leave to look after their families and who doesn't. And also the signals come from the very top, right? Do male CEOs take 3 months of family leave, right, in the private sector? And what signal does that send to men lower down the ranks? Do women CEOs do that too? That's another thing that's come up. But I don't want to focus exclusively on the private sector. These are some sort of cultural norms that just based on what I've read, that the Nordic countries seem to have more equitable practices around than we do in the United States. What really we need to solve right now is the childcare crisis. If we don't solve that as a country, we are not going to achieve gender equity. And I mean, there are many levels to it. Agree that it's about pay equity, and we can talk about pay equity. We can talk about, women in leadership roles and women on boards. But right now, in the United States, our women's labor force participation has sunk to 1987 levels. Prior to the pandemic, more than 60% of women were participating in the labor force. Now it's 56%. And this is largely because of childcare demands. Kids are at home. In New York City, more than half of women who have caregiving duties have either scaled back their workforce participation, their hours, or downsized their careers. And what's happening now is, thankfully, finally, a national recognition that this is something that we have to solve as a country. Right? The Biden administration is investing a lot in shoring up childcare businesses that have closed during the pandemic, and that trying to get them reopened, trying to create more of them, trying to create more access to free and affordable low-cost childcare. But the other problem with the industry is that the margins that are so low that a lot of the folks who work in the industry live in poverty themselves. And so it's not even a sustainable industry without some sort of government support. It's not a sustainable industry to begin with. left to the private sector, right? We don't leave schools entirely to the private sector. Why do we leave 0 to 3 care entirely to the private sector and in the United States? And then just the one other point I want to make is the private sector is very invested in collaborating with government in helping fix this. You know, employee time lost to childcare cost companies enormously. They're losing talent. There's a lot of turnover connected with folks who are unable to perform their full job duties to take care of kids. Women scale back their careers. They work part-time. They consult for a while. Like these are great if these are choices, but if women are making these choices because they can't afford to work, there are many long-term economic costs of those choices in terms of, you know, women's lifetime earnings. And another great topic is how the gender wage gap affects women's earnings over time. But there was an interesting statistic that said that in the United States, 83% of millennials said they would favor a company that has family-friendly policies. Folks are recognizing, the workforce is recognizing that both the public sector and the private sector have a role to play in childcare, delivery, and support. And happy to talk about this a little later. This is something that we're looking at through what we're calling the Childcare Innovation Lab at the New York City Economic Development Corporation. You know, how do the private sector and public sector work together to frame childcare as an economic development issue, not a private family matter? How do we make it available to more families? And how do we improve the conditions of the industry so that it's sustainable for its employees to work in without living in poverty? And once we get a handle on that, I feel like we can move on to some of the board issues and some of the pay equity issues. But if we don't solve childcare in America, we won't get there, I'm afraid. So thank you for the question.
Okay, well, thank you. Sandra Mark is the Chief Contact Director for SAP's Purpose and Sustainability Marketing Department. Leading creative content creation, her team acts as an ecosystem business where content is developed on the basis of SAP's commitment to the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Sandra, to ask you, as an advocate for women's rights in so many different capacities and organizations, what would you say are the policies that really make a difference for working women? I saw you nodding your head up and down while Faye was speaking. Would you agree with Faye that childcare is the central issue facing gender equity?
Yes, it's definitely a huge factor. Thank you so much for the question, Rob, and for the kind introduction. Thrilled to be with you all here today. But yes, childcare is a deeply personal issue to me. I am a fairly new mom to a 15-month-old boy, and I became a mom, very early on in the pandemic, and it was a big challenge to navigate the childcare landscape and how to figure out, how we're going to do this, especially when all the facilities are shut down, as Faye referred to, and it was definitely a jungle, and a lot of family had to be pulled in to act as a support system, right, in order for myself and my husband to maintain our careers. And that's unfortunately just like the reality in the United States. And I'm originally from Denmark myself, and Denmark has such great policies around childcare, very similar to Sweden. So I love what Karen shared just about the welfare society, because I think that is just such a universal foundation in order for us to create true equality, is to have that access to affordable childcare, to education, and to healthcare, all really, really important. But just coming from a corporate perspective, I wanted to speak to my experience on this one. And first of all, I do think that equal pay for equal work is one of the big imperatives when it comes to building a culture where women not only feel like that they're accepted, but feel valued in the workplace. I know that Faye also touched a lot on this one, but parental leave is another huge factor. We need to make a strong push for shared parental leave, so it doesn't become a women's issue, but a family opportunity. when men are included and celebrated as equals in the household and in family responsibilities, we see that that gender-specific impact shifts too. And third, but not least, having a flexible workplace with strong work from home policies and flexible hours, that is really, really important as well to foster women's success in the workplace. And it's something, that I feel really grateful working at a company like SAP, that I have that flexibility and I have the ability to design my own schedule around my personal life as well. So childcare, and I have to spend time in the morning to drop off my son and make sure that all those things happen while still being successful at work, and that's so important that I'm able to manage and control my hours like that. And that's, flexible hours is a really important factor too. So I hope that answers your question, Rob.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Hugrun Hjaltadóttir is a specialist in the Department of Equality at the Prime Minister's office in Iceland. She's been working on project management, policy making, and implementation in the field of gender equality for 15 years. Her experience includes implementation of strategies of evidence-based policy making, such as gender mainstreaming and gender budgeting. So, Hugrun, could you tell us about your work at Iceland's Department of Equality at the Prime Minister's office? What are the most challenging tasks facing Iceland's equality agenda? Do you share the consensus that seems to be forming here that childcare is number one, and how's that looking in Iceland?
Yeah, when I look at my talking points here, they are quite in sync with the previous speakers. And here in Iceland, we have been focusing on the parental leave systems, the daycare system, and equal pay as the foundations of structural equality in Iceland. And we have, since the year 2000, fathers have had their independent right to parental leave in our system here in Iceland. And we recently changed our system to increase the time of both parents to be away from work and receive paid leave. So now each parent has 6 months parental leave, and they can share 6 weeks between them. So you can transfer a little bit of your time to the other parent of the child, which we think is rather important to be able to balance the workload in the home and give fathers the opportunity to stay at home and take responsibility and feel what it is what we are doing and how we are raising the children and getting to know them. And this has been a huge success in Iceland. And then also we have the similar daycare system as the other Scandinavian Nordic countries. And I just wanted to tell you, without getting into too much detail, that I looked up the numbers. And we have in Iceland 94% of children of 2 years in last year were participating in daycare. So you see that most children in Iceland are actively taken care of outside the home a big part of the day, and this is quality daycare that is subsidized by the state, and this is the foundation to the participation of women in the labor market. And in 2019 sorry, it was 75% of Icelandic women were active in the labor force. And this has the connection between the daycare system and the parental leave is quite clear when we take a look at these numbers. And the last thing I mentioned was equal pay. And we have been the last year developing an equal pay standard in Iceland, and it was ready in 2012, but in 2017 it was a political decision to not have it a mandatory standard, but to make it have it a mandatory standard for companies with 50 staff members or more. And we are now in the implementation phase of this, and we are hoping that Iceland, that has been trying to reach equal pay since 1961, when we passed the first law on equal pay, is trying to find a new way to reach these last steps that are needed to reach the goal of equality when it comes to equal pay. So this is, I'll leave it at that. And I'm excited to participate in these discussions today, and I'm glad to hear that we have a common ground to work on. Thank you.
Thank you, Hugrun. Let me ask you, with all the success with childcare in Iceland, I mean, to put you on the spot here, but why did women's employment in April of 2020 collapse, down 11% in Iceland, while male employment only dropped by 3%? Do you have any theories about why that might have occurred?
Yes, and I was quite shocked to see the difference. I hadn't seen it like that, like you put it forth before. But in Iceland, men and women work in different fields. So our workforce is rather segregated by women work in this field and men work in this field. And women have, I think it's the service industry, the big share women have in the service industry that are directly affected by the COVID situation. That mostly would explain this. Yeah.
Okay. Now, our assignment today is reversing the she session, whether we like that term or not. Clearly, this pandemic has shown different patterns that have affected women, were men relative to men, compared to past recessions. And the subhead is ensuring gender equal economic growth post COVID-19. So I'd like to ask the panel, is there anything specific that we need to do coming out of the pandemic? Any policy measures, anything that companies, private sector needs to be doing that's been learned in particular, or that needs to be done in particular in response to COVID-19? Yes, Karen, please.
Well, I mean, I'm glad we have a lot of time to discuss because there's so many interesting threads to talk about here. But I would say that what the pandemic has done, which I think is what happens in crises, it puts a spotlight on structural problems, that we have structural injustices. And I think that's what we've seen now too. So I think the most important thing to build resilient societies is to build on, a general equality perspective. And it's of course a gender equality as a perspective, but it's also, the people who are most vulnerable, who have the least resources, who are hit the worst. And that's what we can see in Sweden too. The gender effect, as you showed, how we haven't seen really a she session. We've been focusing mostly on men's violence against women and violence against children when it comes to gender equality in the pandemic. But of course, we monitor carefully, the development and all the statistics that we have. And then another point there is, it also shows the importance of gender disaggregated statistics, which we always, bring up and talk about, but to be able to follow all the time, to see what happens and to take the necessary measures. But if I could only say two things to start the discussion, I think it would be those two probably.
Sandra, what do you think?
So from the corporate perspective, I think that we definitely have a chance to build back better, echoing what you're saying, Karen. Like when things are torn down, we have an opportunity to build it back even better than it was before. And we do have an opportunity to become very aggressive now around our hiring and our talent acquisition and our retention strategy, especially when it comes to women and marginalized communities as a whole, right? So anyone that's a minority in the workplace, we should take this as an opportunity to lift them up and get really aggressive about the way that we do it. And I know that a lot of large tech companies, including SAP, has made big commitments over the past year around especially inclusive hiring. I know that we have hiring requirements now in place for especially our early talent acquisition. Those are things that we need to see a greater push for so we can accelerate change.
Anyone else?
I can jump in with a couple of ideas here. I think that in addition to the points that have been made, in terms of diversifying recruiting, where are companies hiring? Do they have a few Ivy League schools that they always talk to, or are they recruiting from community college and two-year colleges and public colleges? Are they participating in upskilling programs that create a pipeline from folks from communities that have been impacted by COVID to participate more fully in the economy? I think it also involves a rethinking of caregiving jobs. Why are caregiving jobs so low paid, and why do we accept that definitionally? My dad needs a lot of care, and why do we separate the people that come provide the care from the people who come to provide the medical needs? Isn't there an opportunity to combine them into a higher skilled role that could potentially, give caregivers a path to advancement in the healthcare industry? Maybe we don't need so many nurses and care attendants. Maybe these are there are ways to rethink these traditionally low paid roles. And I think that that's potentially true of our sort of daycare system too. We need to make sure that folks who are providing this incredibly important work with our kids have paths to advancement in their careers, to move forward, to earn more money themselves. And I also think that it's important, just going back to sort of more corporate jobs, companies need to recognize that many women say that they feel that they have been penalized for the career gaps that they take and to care for their kids, right? And there's an economic cost to that too. That if you're out of the workforce for some time, maybe your skills get stale, or you have to come in at a lower rate, to a lower salary to account for the gap that you took off. There are a number of programs like relaunch programs and a path forward where companies are embracing women who have been out of the workforce for some time and creating on-ramps to help them re-enter corporate life, especially women with particular, highly skilled STEM abilities. And so that's, those are important programs now as ever. And I would also say that, companies who don't even participate in these relaunch programs need to recognize that COVID has caused a lot of career gaps, and we need to be empathetic about those and welcoming, and not hold career gaps against folks. We shouldn't do that anyway, but especially not now.
Thank you. Hey, Hugrun, in Iceland, I'm very curious how about the equal pay standard. How is it enforced, and what happens? Are companies penalized if they don't practice equal pay? You're muted.
Sorry. Yeah, you have to show that you have implemented the standard. So you have to show this government institution, the Directorate for Equality, that you have implemented the standard and with a certificate from a proper company. And if you don't do it, and you have been asked to show us the paperwork, you will get per diem fines. Yes, so it is enforced. Yeah, quite. Yeah, so it's monitored. Yeah, quite closely.
So do you feel it works?
We're, in the middle of the river, and yes, I think it's working. We will see. We are expecting now this summer a bit research on equal pay in Iceland, and that will be our first indicator if it's really working. And at the time, it's the biggest companies, 250 staff members and more, that had to start the implementation, and then we go down into lower numbers of staff. So the bigger companies, they are made to plot the path for the smaller companies to follow, we could say, so we can learn the process. And yeah, so it's still 1 year until all of the companies that are by law should implement this have, there's still 1 year to go, so to say. Yeah, so it's quite interesting times regarding this in Iceland.
Okay. Thank you. You know, changing tack to policy questions. Last week, my first trip since the pandemic, I visited Colombia, the country, and I was so impressed and surprised to see government financing programs for businesses run by women. Karen, what can government do to mobilize financing and for women-founded businesses, and what do you have in Sweden to address this? Oh, I muted.
I worked it out. I was moving things around here. I mean, that's a really important question, and something that we need to, we have to look into more. We have been working with, let's see the name, I looked it up in English, the Swedish Agency for Economic and Regional Growth. And also we have a public sort of investment company, and they are commissioned to work really actively with gender equality, both, you know, the whole spectrum. So to encourage investors to work more actively with investing in companies that are run or co-run by women, but also, of course, with the money, the public funds that actually goes to support startups and different programs. But I think there's definitely more that we need to do there. But we have been trying to work that, but it's always a little bit tricky to come from the policy perspective and regulate the private sector. But we're trying to do it in the way we can, with creating incentives and opportunities, access to funds. But it's a bigger issue because the big private investment companies, that's where the real money is, and we need to have a shift of attitude there too.
Yes,
I wouldn't mind grabbing, having a chance to speak to that question, Professor, if it's okay. So this is something we're very proud of in New York City, is our supports for MWBEs, which are minority and women-owned business enterprises. And a few years ago, our leadership in city government looked at the data and recognized that female entrepreneurs were had numerous strikes against them. They had less revenue, they had less access to capital, and they had higher interest rates. They didn't have the same networks. They didn't have many of the tools that they needed to succeed in business in the same way that I'll say white men were thriving, because you see similar issues among business owners of color too, and which is why we have a new program called Black Entrepreneurs in New York City, but I'm getting ahead of myself here. So in 2016, the New York City launched the Women Entrepreneurs NYC program, which was an amazing program that aimed to level the playing field for female entrepreneurs by creating a number of supports, both technical assistance, mentorship, free legal counseling for many of the sort of similar issues that businesses encounter, like legal structure and so forth. We also created funding tools specifically to offset the funding gaps that female business owners encountered. And these are only in New York City funding tools that were created by the public sector and the private sector together to help more business owners, more women business owners, though technically anybody can apply, because that's how the law has to be, access capital to grow their businesses. And it also had the effect of creating a whole culture around entrepreneurship for women in New York City. And it is an incredible, incredible resource. I mean, one of the things you see a lot is that, there's this whole sort, I call it the feminist industrial complex, right? You can go more so prior to COVID, you could pay, $500 or $1,000 and go to an event and get all kinds of advice from women who, very successful. And, but that's like really a pay to play phenomenon where the information is going to people who can afford to be in the room in the first place. And one thing that I'm proud to say New York City has done really well is create a welcoming sort of information bank and in communities that's open to everybody. Come on in and, we have the same sort of, everything's free. You get incredibly high quality information and community and support for your entrepreneurial journey without having to pay a lot of money. You don't have to pay anything to get it in New York City. And it's been hugely impactful. Thousands and thousands of women have participated in this program. It's called We NYC, and it's out of the Department of Small Business Services. And it's sister to Women.NYC initiative. And it's really a standard bearer for how city government can be an agent of change for entrepreneurship. And I encourage folks, we get asked about it all the time from other countries and cities. So I encourage folks to check it out if you're looking for ways the government can help female business owners thrive and overcome sort of adversity that they've historically encountered.
Thank you. Senator, you seem to agree heartily with this. Would you like to weigh in?
Yeah, no, all the perspectives are so great. And I'm such a big fan of Women.NYC and what they've built, not just on the community level, but all these tangible resources and assets and tools that are made available for women citywide, right? And almost statewide. I think people are coming outside of New York City into the Women.NYC program as well. And we need initiatives like that so badly, and especially when it comes to starting new businesses and entrepreneurs. That's going to be one of the key accelerators for us to achieve gender equality, is when women are starting their own businesses and becoming the future Fortune 500 CEOs, right? And growing those businesses into incredible corporations and organizations. And we need strong support systems around that. And it's great when private and public sector can come together in establishing an ecosystem that allows for that.
Thank you. What are there initiatives like this in Iceland, Robb?
We have some initiatives and funds that are specially directed for women entrepreneurs, and especially for women with smaller business ideas to begin with. But then we have also tried to make the traditional environment more accessible for women. So we take a look also at the structures in our traditional entrepreneurs funding. Can we change these kind of structures to be accessible to more diversity of people? So we don't have like only extra funds for women and other groups, and then this regular fund only go to white middle-aged men. If we can put it blunt like this, that how can we open up this traditional environment to include more people, a diversified group within the same system, not a separate system. So this has to go hand in hand with the separate system in the beginning. So yeah, that is what we have been doing here, and I'm hoping that we will be able to strengthen our system of entrepreneurship and ingenuity in post-COVID society. Yeah.
When we first started speaking, the strong consensus that childcare was a central issue, and we left one stone unturned. I'd like to ask Faye, why is it so bad here in the United States? What are the historic, cultural reasons, economic reasons? Why is the United States, as such a rich and powerful country, do such a poor job at providing childcare that's affordable and high quality. And when research shows, equity shows how vitally important it is. Why can't we get our act together, Faye?
Well, I want to say I hope that's changing. First of all, it has its roots in the Nixon administration, where we all historically we almost had childcare in this country, and it's fascinating to understand how we came really close and how it was torpedoed in the 70s, and we've never come close again. And it's definitely worth reading the sort of political forces that killed childcare back then. I feel like we're about to change, right? There's will in the White House to address this issue. I know our vice president is especially concerned about this issue. In New York City, we were one of the first municipalities to offer universal pre-K for 4-year-olds a few years ago. Folks didn't think it could be done. It was going to be too costly. It was going to be impossible. The Mayor de Blasio, that was what he ran on as one of his signature programs. It was, by the time he was in office in January, it was up and running by September. And then personally, my daughter was in the first class of free pre-K. It was a huge game changer in terms of, the money that we would have spent on pre-K. In New York City, it's incredibly costly. It could be $20,000, $30,000, for private education. That was a huge game changer for us. And other places followed. Another thing that we're working on now is 3K. Like, we're working our way down, and we're starting to adjust that on a local level. But agree that it's got to come from the federal government, and it has to be something that is recognized as a priority nationally. And I think that the data is showing that it is. That if you look at the survey data, how could you be against affordable childcare? Like, who's against that? Like, it's crazy that it's has to be since the Nixon administration in the 70s that we're starting to really look at this seriously again. But the political will is there. The will is there in Washington. I think that we're going to see this change, in the next few years. And also, folks saw in their own lives, men, not that men didn't understand this before, but we all experienced what this lack of infrastructure means in painful, powerful ways this year. And I feel like the conversation is really evolving quickly in the right direction in this country. And hopefully it's going to change with this administration.
If I could just add to that from the perspective of economics, the data from, I know people know the Perry preschool program in the early 1960s, which is a controlled experiment, which you couldn't do today. But one group of children were funneled into very high quality, expensive pre-K 3- and 4-year-olds, and another was left, as we say, untreated. And we're now seeing not only did the children who go into the treatment program have higher incomes, higher educational attainment, better health outcomes, spent less time in prison. We even see the impact on their grandchildren. And the evidence is so compelling. So, Sandra, if you want your son, to spend less time in prison and to have better health outcomes, the more stimulation you give him, the better. That's just the data is so compelling. In any case, that's an encouraging news, though, Faye, that we're headed in the right direction. We have an interesting question that's come in from.
I think Richard, Karen has the hand.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry, Karen. I'm so sorry.
Oh, you're muted, Karen.
You'd think that after a digital year, we'd mute and unmute. No, but I just wanted to add, it's so expensive to not provide childcare. To keep, not 50% of the population, but 50% of parents home and not working and not paying, earning an income and paying taxes. So it's just also such a powerful economic argument, I think, to afford this. And that's just one perspective, but sometimes the economic argument goes down well when others doesn't. And I think that maybe when I was preparing myself for this seminar and I was thinking through, why might our situation and the effects on women and men differ a little bit in Sweden. I think we made a lot of these, it was interesting to hear you, Faye, when you said that in the 70s you were almost, you were almost there. And it was in the 70s that we made a lot of these structural reforms as the general childcare system, individual taxation, and a lot of these really important milestones. And I think that's what we're benefiting from now, because it does, it does give us a higher degree of equality and also more resilience, I think. So.
Senator, there's a question that's come in for you from the audience. They feel that someone feels that men and women pitch in different ways, and is that something that you need to take into account? How do you feel about that?
It's such an interesting question, and definitely something that has come up a lot, especially in this past decade. And it's always been around, fixing women, right? Women are not doing it the right way, and men are doing it in a much more confident, much more, aggressive way than women. But I think that the tables are turning a little bit now. I think that the way that people are pitching and the way that people are representing themselves, it's much more important that they come across as authentic and trustworthy. We live in a different society now where trust is such an important factor, and we're not just going to go with the regular salesman's pitch or the traditional salesman's pitch. We actually want to hear the authentic voice of whoever is sharing their idea, right? And I think that there's a much wider understanding of what is a great pitch. A great pitch is the foundation and the substance of the idea that you're trying to relay. And yeah, I think that women have such great tools and a level of empathy and of natural empathy, just because of the nature of feminist values and feminine values, that they come across with their message in an equally powerful, if not more powerful way. And I think that that's where we need to get to. We shouldn't look at women as someone or people who need to be fixed. I think that the way that women represent themselves are amazing. We should not look at like the traditional ways as the right ways, right? Because there's a reason why they haven't worked and become more sustainable than they are today. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. Hey, while I've got you here, can you tell some examples, some stories of projects you've been involved with at SAP on that create scale impact for women?
Yes, so I was actually thinking about this question a lot these last couple of days, because I kind of took root in this past year of COVID, because there's no doubt that the She Session has been devastating to our progress on gender equality. The data speaks for itself. You laid it out for us in the beginning, and I think that it's now each and every one of our responsibility to take steps towards a she-covery. And I've seen so many incredible creative initiatives come out both from the private sector and the public sector over the course of this year. One thing that SAP facilitated, which I saw a lot of our peers and also customers and partners facilitate, were these inclusive hiring initiatives. There's obviously a big push towards it based on everything that happened devastatingly with George Floyd and to marginalized communities. And I think that really pushed us in the right direction, thinking, and Faye, you mentioned this in the beginning of the session as well, not just looking at the Ivy League pedigree, candidates for our jobs, but really going out there in the field and going to, the untraditional hiring routes of onboarding diverse talent that they'll end up adding to our culture and not just fitting our culture, right? And I think that that's been a key differentiation in our perspectives as corporates and in the private sector, especially this past year, that we need to enhance our organizations. We can only do that if we add to our culture and not just fit our culture. I saw that there's a beauty brand called Number 7 that came out with a really strong initiative in their industry called Unstoppable Together, which also gained a lot of traction in the market. And then I just think that one thing that's been key priority for us throughout this past year is to focus on providing visibility to women in the workplace, especially because women has been pulling the double shift, as Sheryl Sandberg refers to it as, which is just a superpower in itself. Like, how do women manage, an entire household when the kids are home from school and, maintain their full-time jobs? It's like unbelievable that women have that capacity even in the first place, and it shouldn't even, be like that. But that's a superpower in of itself, and we've wanted to celebrate that. So we've really highlighted, a lot of the women, who've been able to successfully manage both and just also just shed light on the important factors in order to make women successful in the workplace while something like this is happening, which is the flexible hours, the flexible work, and being able to create an environment that really supports that. And then the last thing I wanted to highlight, which is an initiative that we actually just launched this week, our program, is our partnership with Hey Mama, which is just a phenomenal organization committed to working moms' success in the workplace. And what we've gone in and done from SAP side is that we're offering thousands of grants in memberships to moms across 3 categories. So entrepreneurs, Latinx, and single moms. So if you fit any of those categories and you are a mom, then don't hesitate to reach out to me so I can get you nominated for one of those memberships and one of those pathways where we can get you, great mentorship from senior leaders in your industry. And yeah, I think those are all initiatives and partnerships and programs that help accelerate change during these crazy times.
Is that just in the United States, or is that in all countries, the grants?
This is a North America initiative. We're hoping to expand it, but for now, Hey Mama, the organization that we've partnered with, is a North America-based organization.
Thank you. Hugran, you seem to, I can see you nodding enthusiastically. Is it just in support of the initiatives, or is there something going on also in Iceland that we should know about?
Oh, no, I thought it was really interesting what Sandra was telling us about, and also when she was talking about the women and their pitching. I was also thinking about who are they pitching to. That is a world that we need to change as well. So the values of the people who are making the judgments, of the people that are making the pitches, who is in control of the flow of the money, and that of course is a changing world as well. And I hope we will see more changes in the future. So that's why I was nodding so much here. Thank you.
I'd just like to add, 2 people have mentioned the Ivy League, and I would say my own. Let's not forget, we produce some wonderful students at Columbia with all the same values and hardworking, who overcome adversity to varying degrees. We need all types of people, not just the non-Ivy League people, I have to say, on behalf of my wonderful students. Here's an interesting question that I'm very curious about your response to this. It's come from the audience. How do we prevent gender from becoming a straitjacket in the workplace these days, where gender is more fluid? And how do we engage the next generation in these strategic discussions? For example, equal pay for equal work. Does that have just binary genders, Hugran, or is there a fluidity? How do people feel about that?
the idea about the equal pay standard, for example, it's that you have to have a system that you pay you pay people by a specific system that is not reflected, that the person itself is not reflected, but the qualities and skills that you need to possess to be able to have that job. So it's the job that is evaluated, not the person doing the job, so to say. So then, of course, things like gender and ethnicity and other factors should not matter. You should be evaluated on the grounds of your capacity to fill this position, and this position has this pay inside of this structure. So we are taking maybe the individual a little bit out of it, so to say, and also then the identity of the individual. So maybe it's a different approach, not to evaluate the individual, but evaluate the job the individual is supposed to be doing in relation to other jobs within the company. And yeah, so I hope this opens up the binary situation. Yeah.
So how do others feel about whether we're making, as the question asks, whether gender could be becoming a straitjacket, as the questioner says? Ife.
You know, people say the things, people ask advocates of racial equality if we're becoming too polarized by race. And I guess, or they would say the same thing to advocates of LGBTQ rights. Are we becoming too polarized by sexual orientation? I would say no. I mean, these are real issues that we face, but I do think that absolutely that workplaces need to be more hospitable for people with a variety of gender expressions. And look, if there's no, if men and women, to be binary about it, have the same access to opportunity in the workplace, are paid equally, and are equally represented in high-paying roles, which is something I just want to talk about in a minute, then if there's true equality, then it doesn't matter what gender you are or how you express, or everyone's equal, right? But I don't, I do not want to diminish discrimination against folks who don't fit traditional gender roles or patterns or expressions, and I know that that's a real thing, and that discrimination in every aspect of life is absolutely real for those folks. But I guess that it's something we need to be aware of, and thank you for the person who raised it. But I think we still have to be able to frame the caregiving gap in sort of the experience of moms. And they could, you know, if we're looking for equality, and I think that those could be, or maybe it's a tricky one, right? Because to call everybody parents, I think, masks the fact that moms and dads have different experiences, that there is a gender pay gap, that fathers earn more than you know, a non-parenting male, and mothers earn less than a non-parenting female. So there is a real gender gap, and somehow it's a balance between addressing these gender gap issues while making workplaces more hospitable for all gender expressions, because that is real. But I do want to just talk about the sort of question of equal pay for equal work, because it's not quite enough, right? Yes, we need equal pay for equal work, but one of the things we found in the United States, you know, unfortunately, we don't have a law that requires countries to be transparent about pay equity. But when individual companies have looked at their pay equity practices, if you're just looking at equal pay for equal work, right? Like all the VPs of marketing, male or female, are earning the same, right? Or you're just looking at the pay parity for the same roles. It's a lot easier for a company to look good because they could say, look, we're paying people the same for the same type of roles. But when you get in and look at who are the real high earners in the company, who is in the high paying roles, who's in the high paying finance roles, who's doing the deals, who's doing who's making all the money, and who's in the support roles, who's doing the administrative work, who's in the sort of lower paid roles in the company. A lot of those companies that are presumably offering equal pay for equal work don't look as good because you see that by and large, it's white males who are making all the money at these companies. And that's something that, that's why we talk about having more women on boards and it's not just pay parity. We need to really have strategies to have more women, especially women of color, have paths to advancement into the senior ranks and into high earning roles in our companies. So that's just something I wanted to mention as part of this conversation.
Any others like to comment on this, Sandra?
Yes, I have a perspective on this one. So it's something that we've been taking a really close look at SAP for this past year. And we're conducting a big research study right now in 3 phases. And we're in the middle of phase 2, but we're looking at intersectionality at work. Intersectionality is such an interesting phenomenon and concept, that was academically born in the 80s, but is now really gaining traction in the workplace and in the corporate setting. But essentially what intersectionality is that it's a number of different identifiers that make us up as people. And it's a really powerful, I don't even know what to call it, because it's not a tool and it's not a driver, but it's a way of looking at people, with all the layers that make up who they are. So, in my case, I'm a woman and I'm a mother, and, I have all these different identifiers, but there might be another person in our organization who is Latinx, single mom, first person in her family to get an education. And there are all these different layers that makes up, our individual candidates within our company and talents. And the way that we're looking at intersectionality is that people should never feel like that they're in a role because they tick a box, but we still have to ensure that there's equitable treatment of all of our employees across the board. And a way of doing that is to look at intersectionality and ensure that we're building the fences and the barriers in the company in the right heights, depending on who we're talking to. So I think that's a really valuable concept to look into as we look at the more gender fluid concepts within the workplace. And it definitely has been a great resource for SAP, and something that we're going to be investing heavily into over the course of the next 5 years.
Anyone else?
I think Karen.
Karen?
Yes, no, but so many important points that you are all making. With the intersectionality perspective also, we've realized that the last few years that we really have to focus on the conditions of foreign-born women, because we see that there we have really some challenges with access to the labor market and entering the labor market. Earning your own income and all that follows with that. So I think that's a very important point to look at the layers combined to see what we really need to do. And I also want to add to the point of the gender segregated labor market. I think Hugrun was bringing it up, and that's also a problem when it comes to gender equality that we're struggling with in Sweden still, that women and men to a large extent work in different sectors. And bringing it back to COVID, there are 2 interesting aspects of that. The sector that has been hit the hardest when it comes to unemployment in Sweden because of the pandemic is hotels and restaurants. And there we have an equal distribution. I mean, as many men and women working. So that hasn't really had a gender effect, but women are largely employed in the public sector. And in Sweden, the healthcare system and the school and elderly care is publicly funded. It's a public sector, so it's huge. And that sector is not as vulnerable to quick shifts, you know, on the market. So that might also have had an effect on our unemployment statistics. But how do we change this? And now we're coming to the issue of norms. And I think that's so important. And where are the men? Where are the men in the struggle for gender equality? I mean, it's the 2020 first, you know, 2021 now, and we still don't see them enough, I think, because, you know, to have I mean, to some extent, you know, if you have, in Sweden, we have 349 seats in the parliament. When women entered, men had to, you know, leave space for the women. But in so many issues, it isn't like that. And I think changing norms, so also so that it's possible and not something strange for a father to stay at home with a child when you have a newborn son and or girl and have a relationship with your children. It's you know, both parties gain in this. And just the last point, and I think, but that's really tough. And I think that sometimes, you know, laws and regulations also have a normative effect. So we have to build up, for example, with taxation, with childcare, that also will help change norms. And how can we build all of these aspects? How can people talk about nudging now, I'm not an expert on that, but how can we shape our systems so that we're continually working against these norms that are not doing us any good? I think these are some really important issues, and it would be nice to hear if you have some suggestions.
Well, Hugo, what do you think? And I also was surprised at the outset when you said that occupations are segregated by gender within Iceland. Do you think it's more pronounced in Iceland than in other Nordic countries? And if so, for such a progressive country, at least as we see it from afar, why would that be the case?
Yeah, it's more segregated in Iceland than in Sweden and the other Scandinavian countries. And I really have to just go to the cultural norms with the answer, because if I had another answer, you know, the situation hopefully would be different. But I think, you know, we have seen through the years and through history or her story, if I could use that phrase, for the hundreds of years that we have been in Iceland, had the right to vote. We thought in the beginning that, you know, if we only got the right to vote, we would fix this and we would reach gender equality. But then we found new ways to rephrase equality and what it means. And I think this goes across the board and for other and for intersectionality as well, that we have to look at our cultural practices and how they are reinforcing themselves and maintaining the situation that we live in, that is not maybe the ideal situation for anybody in society, because we have like this, we have, it is the way of the society to reconstruct itself, and we have to use tools to find other ways to reconstruct our society, and that is what we have been doing, and it's our project across the world. I think with the demand from people that we want to see a changed world, and we have to listen, we that are working in policy making and politics, and see how can we bring the agenda forward. And we have these world events like now this pandemic that makes us face our reality in different ways. And I want to mention another world event that I think is helping us, at least here in Iceland now, and that is the Metoo Movement, which is a big world event where we finally were able to make these cultural structures that make violence against women like a socially accepted fact. And we finally found a way to like, no, it is something else. It's not just an individual experience. There is something in our cultural fabric that we have to work with. And I think now in this pandemic, the emphasis on the importance of violence and discussion violence in close relationship against women and girls and children in general, it's been important. And I think that in this recession, we hopefully will be able to do better than we have done in previous recessions to stand guard of our weakest people that are most vulnerable to these situations. Yeah. And these kind of transatlantic cooperation and discussions, I think, are important in this field, and we have all opportunities to learn from each other. And even though we feel that here today we are talking about parental leave and daycare, and we are fortunate here, some of us, to live in societies with this infrastructure, but at the same time, we are also learning from America. And we have here in Iceland now 3 family justice centers that are built in the on the ideas of the family justice centers that we got to know in New York. So we would like to thank you for the experience that you and the beautiful work that has been done overseas that we can bring here to our country. So yeah, it is important to use also this technology that we have to have this conversation without the jet lag, you know, without the travel. So it's been quite interesting. And yeah, I will leave it at that.
We take your childcare system and our interventions around diversity, and we might.
Yeah.
I was wondering, Professor Robb, if there's a minute for me to address this sort of idea of cultural and folks choosing things based on history and practices and cultural norms. I mean, I think that is a big thing to tackle, but it's possible. And I think that it's the role of sort of public-private collaboration. And I think it's really important to look at universities. You know, I'm not sure how the university college system is set up in all of these, in all the countries represented here, but I just wanted to use an example of an organization that's called Breakthrough Tech in the United States. It started in New York City. And the founder was, she had worked in the private sector. Her name is Judy Spitz, in Verizon in the tech world there. And her goal was to figure out why the overall percentage of girls graduating in STEM was declining, in computer science specifically. Why is it that as computer science is revealing itself to be an incredibly lucrative, valuable career path, that even as it was growing as a field, women's representation was decreasing? And she looked at, you know, existing programs. And one of the things that she encountered was that, like, the basic computer science class was structured like organic chemistry in the medical field. Like in the United States, like that's like to separate the wheat from the chaff, you know, to weed people out. Like it's incredibly rigorous. And that's the organic chemistry is something you would study if you want to become a doctor. And if you can't pass OChem, you can't become a doctor. And the computer science classes were set up the same way. And it wasn't resonating with girls, and curriculum was based on, you know, from the beginning of computer use in the United States, originally most coders were women, but as the home computer evolved, you know, the Commodore 64s, and so Americans started getting them in their homes, men were designing the games, and, you know, they were very geared toward boys and what boys wanted to do on a computer, and not necessarily, sorry, there goes my dog, what women and girls, how they might interact with the machine, right? I mean, there's a little bit of gender determinism here, I'm not gonna lie, but as you know, Judy looked at this, she said, this class, the way that the computer science curriculum is set up is just driving girls away. How do we do this differently? How do we recreate the curriculum in such a way as that it appeals to more girls? They see themselves as part of it, not as, you know, rejects from this class. And this is, you know, she's done a lot of other things to literally drive up. I mean, it's a very data-based approach to literally drive up the number of graduates from the CUNY system who are women who are graduating with computer science degrees. You know, another thing just quickly was a lot of the students at CUNY were low income and weren't getting jobs at you know, after graduation at the Googles and all these other companies. And she said, why aren't you hiring my students? And they said, because they don't have internship experiences. And she said, they can't afford internship experiences. These are kids who work 3 jobs to put themselves and support their families while they're in college. And so she figured out a way to get companies to pay for internship experiences. So it's called a winternship. It's 5 weeks. So these low income, you know, folks from low income, incredibly diverse group of girls who, without this sort of hand-to-hand combat that Judy's doing in the trenches in this field and in academia, would never have graduated with degrees in computer science. And now they're working at companies all over New York City. The program's gone national and it's being replicated in Chicago and elsewhere. It's being funded by Melinda Gates. And I guess what I'm saying is that norms can change, right? I mean, Judy happens to be incredibly effective and this program is obviously very, very effective. And it takes sort of somebody to make that change happen, whether it's in the private sector, it's in academia, it's in the public sector. We really need everybody on board, but that norms can change. You know, there's more examples of that. This non-traditional employment for women is an organization that trains women for work in the trades, you know, construction trades. And, you know, that's not an easy space for women, but they're working on it. And that I think that, you know, is how can we be tools of change and challenging cultural norms for the, you know, if we want a truly diverse economy. So, and that's just not gender, that's across all intersectional identities, you know, particular communities of color.
Well, I think we've used up our time, and I think it's nice to end on this hopeful note. I'm also happy to know that Iceland is actually learning from the United States. I think of us as so far behind compared to the Scandinavian countries. Another positive point to take away. So I just want to thank everyone for allowing me to intrude and participate in this fascinating discussion. And I understand that there are 2 more panels, which also promise to be quite informative, although I think ours will be the best. And so thank you again to everyone. I've learned so much, and I hand it over to Victoria.
Thank you, Richard, you included, and thank you to every Sandra, Faye, Karen, Hugon. I mean, this is absolutely the right discussions we need to have. And it's interesting because for these panels, we have actually searched to find men to participate, and it's very hard. So just having you raising these questions and opening up this discussion and sharing, that's the whole purpose with this, having a transatlantic discussion, because we can really, I think, Faye, you were going to want a very nice country where we combine the best from several countries. So it's so important. So really thank you for sharing. We will be continuing with this webinar series. And the next one will be on May 11th, where we will deep dive into funding the next female unicorn. And we'll look kind of on the financing and the promoting of female entrepreneurship, because we really need to look at it from different angles. So that would be a more entrepreneurial perspective. I believe that was my final words. I hope to see you again. Again, thank you so much, everyone, to joining today. We will be sharing small clips of this webinar and make it available, because I think it's we had some great discussion points here. So thank you, everyone, and good night to those in Europe, and good morning, and have a wonderful day to the rest of you. Thank you so much.